What is up, guys? Welcome back to my channel, Cloud Space with Siba. My name is Siba, and I look forward to having you do this video because in this video, I'm going to be showing you how I provision an API gateway that uses a custom domain. Now, I will be using the CDK to do this, and of course, there will be other services that come into play. For example, Amazon Certificate Manager that will use to then to request certificates that will then use with the custom domain within API gateway. Then another thing that you will see me do is I'll be logging into my service provider to then change the CNAME records and how they point to the custom domain that I will be using. So yeah, let's get started. I did say we're using the CDK. So if you look here, what I've done here already is I've ran the CDK, in net command simply because I didn't want to do it during the video. It just takes time to do that, but you can just simply do the same on your side if you're following through, and that will then generate these files over here. Right, so yeah, let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I honestly don't like a few things about the generated code here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to clean it up a bit. So we're going to start there, get rid of all these comments here. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do that here as well. You don't have to do this, but I just like to work in a clean environment, clean space, right? Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to rename these to main.ts. Again, I just don't like the generic naming that's used by the CDK. Right, cool. Now that we've done that, I'll have to change something here as well. Let me just check. Yeah, cool. Let me just change how it's pointing that file, or else it just won't know where that file is. Cool. That should be fine. Let me just check. Yeah, cool. I'm happy with that. Now, the first thing we are going to do is let's get a bit of order here in terms of how we're going to do this. So the first thing is, number one, is we are going to request and validate an SSL certificate with ACM. That's the first thing we're going to do here. Then the second thing that we are going to do is I am then going to add an API using API gateway. Right, cool. Now, if you've watched my videos before in relation to the CDK, then you'll know that the next thing that I do here is to create a folder called constructs. And you can look at the documentation in terms of the details around constructs, but you want to think of constructs really as reusable code that allows you to create a group of AWS resources toward a specific with a specific goal in mind, right? So let me just create the ones that we will be able to work with here. So ACM is one of them, and then API gateway. Right, cool. Cool. Now that we have that, let's start with ACM. So in ACM, I'm going to create two files. One is going to be types.ts, and then the next one is going to be index.ts. Cool. Close all of these. Let's keep index types. So in types, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an interface. Hopefully you've worked with TypeScript. I don't have time to get into TypeScript now, so we're going to have iCertificate, and it's going to have three properties, one being a certificate name, which will be of type string, and then domain name, which will also be of type string, and then I'm going to have what is known as alternative names string. And it's also going to be of type string, but it's going to be an array of strings. So let me just explain what's happening here. When we request the certificate, we're going to need these values to be passed in, right? One being the certificate name, the domain name that we're trying to get a certificate for, and therefore we will validate, as well as some other alternative names, right, that we want to be part of that certificate. Cool. Having now done that, we'll now get into the should I call this the index.ts file. Cool. Now what I'm gonna do is here, almost had a brain fart there. I'm gonna get constructs. We're gonna get construct. Cool. And then the other thing I'm going to do here is once we've done that, I'm going to import all as ACM from AWS CDK lib, and then we're gonna look for the certificate manager library specifically, right? And then once we've done that, let's get our class going. So I'm gonna call this class ACM, which extends the construct. Cool. Then we're gonna have a constructor, and in that we'll pass in the scope, which is the construct itself. Then we're gonna have a string, ID of type string, and then we're gonna have props. And the props are gonna be of type certificate, the one that we created. And that's very important, right? And I'll show you one. Then what we'll do is we'll pass both the ID and the scope. All right, cool. Now, what we need to do then is create a public property. So I'm going to say public read only ACM, and that's going to be of type ACM.I certificate. Right, cool. And that's very important because that itself is the construct we'll use to get the certificate requested. Cool. So now, in order to request the certificate, now all we say is this.acm equals new acm.certificate. We pass it this scope as well as the ID. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just pass in the ID that's passed in when this construct is used, and I'm just going to add ACM to it. Sorry, ACM. And then we'll pass the properties. Now, remember, we need the certificate. That's going to come from the props certificate name. We need the domain name, which is going to come from props.domain name. And then the subject, which will be props.alternative names, right? So subject alternative names for us is alternative names. Then how are we going to validate the certificate? How are we going to do that is by saying ACM certificate validation, and we're going to validate from DNS. Now, I have done a video that covers this actually, so I'll leave the link in the description, and it deals specifically with how we get we request certificates from ACM using the CDK. Cool. Now, I'm gonna say const certificate ARN, and what we're gonna do here, we are gonna get the certificate ARN. And the reason we're doing that is because what I want to do is I want to output that. So I'm going to say output, and then I'm going to pass the scope again, the instance again, and then what we're going to say is certificate name, sorry, ARN, and what we're then going to say is value, which will be the certificate ARN. Essentially, all that does is that you'll see this when we deploy this, the stack over here, we'll be able to get this as an output, right? Cool. We're done with the certificate. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to bring that in here. So what we're going to say is we're going to say certificate equals new ACM. Cool. Yes, ACM. And then we're going to, similar to how we did it in the, whatchamacallit this, in the previous file, say this. And then we're going to say cloud space. And then SSL. That's just to name this specific resource. And then what I'm going to do, looks like it's complaining about something. Let's do a quick fix. Please import that. Cool. There we go. So now we're going to say certificate name. What certificate do we want? What domain do we want this certificate requested for? And of course that will be cloudspace.co.za. And then, sorry man, certificate name, we'll call it cloudspace.co.za. And then we'll do the same for the domain as well. We're going to call it cloudspace.co.za. And then in terms of the alternative names, essentially what we're doing is we are getting ourselves a wildcard certificate. And that's it, we're done. We're done with the certificate. And of course, this is going to be very, very important and paramount when we get now into the API. Cool. So how am I going to deal with API gateway? Great question. So what I'm going to do is, before I get started with that, I'm just going to close these and come here. And again, very similar pattern. What we're going to do is we're going to create types.ts, and then I'm going to create another one called API gateway. Okay, .ts as well. Now, in the interfaces, what I'm going to do is I am going to import, that's the first thing I'm going to do. I'm going to import something from the CDK lib certificate manager, right? And what we want from there is iCertificate. And you're going to see why this is important when we work with the other interfaces. So the first thing I'm going to do is create interface. I'm going to say REST API. And okay. And essentially for our REST API, we're going to have name, which will be string. Okay, stage name will also be a string. Custom domain, which will also be a string. Now, in case you're wondering where this we're going to use this interface, I'll show you now. It's going to be used in the props. So and then certificate is going to be a type certificate, right? The one that we brought in at the top there. Then we're going to have what is known as resources, which will be of type resource, type resource, and it's going to be a list of those, right? Now, where are we going to get those? That's the next part I get into. So export, I'll get into that a bit later, but the next one we're going to do is iResource child. Okay. And it's going to have a name of type string, and it's going to have a method called string, and it's going to have what is known as a proxy, but the proxy won't be required. It can be passed in, but it won't be required. Now, let's do the iResource now. So let's get the iResource interface, and that's going to have a string, and then it's going to have children of type iResource child, right? And it's going to take a list of those, right? Cool. Now all of our interfaces are ready, and now let's get into the API gateway itself. Now, similar to our previous construct, we're going to start setting this up. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to import the construct from constructs. So we're going to import where is the auto completion? So we're going to say import everything as API gateway from AWS CDK lib, and then we're going to say AWS API gateway. Perfect. Nothing new. We then are going to import, as you've guessed it, from the types, we're going to import iREST API. Cool. Now, what we're then going to do is we're going to export a class called API gateway, which extends it construct. Cool. Right. Then we're going to have constructor. Okay. Nothing you haven't seen before. We're then going to have construct ID of type string, and of course props. And in this case, they will take in iREST API as we've brought it in at the top there. Then we're going to do this. We're going to bring these into the super function here, method here. And then what I want to do is we get started with getting the property ready. So in here, we're going to say read only. I'm going to call this APG, and it's going to be of type gateway REST API. Cool. Now, what's the next thing here? Cool. So we're gonna do a couple of things here. One, we're gonna get API gateway. The second thing we're gonna do is, apologies. Two is we're gonna add the custom domain name. All right. Then the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna add domain name and REST API mapping. That's the thing. Next thing we're gonna do. Then what we're gonna do is we're gonna add the fourth thing we're gonna do is to add a base method for. I wanna say we're gonna add a root path for the API slash. I wanna say root path slash method for the API. That's the thing. Then the next thing I'm going to do is we are going to add custom paths, right? And you're going to see how this plays in with the interfaces we created at the top, right? Cool. So let's do this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say this a.apg equals new API gateway dot REST API dot REST API. Cool. And then it's going to pass it this. And then, of course, we're going to pass it the ID. And then we're going to say APG. And then it's going to take in some options. It's going to take in some options, right? It's going to take in a REST API name. And that's going to come from our props name. Then in terms of deploy options, we're going to have a stage here, right? And the stage is going to come from props dot stage name. Cool. You see how handy the props are, right? In terms of auto completion. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to say const domain equals new apg gateway dot domain name, and of course we're going to pass it this, and then we are going to pass it the ID dash, and I'll say APG domain name. Cool. Then we're going to pass it the properties that are required. It's going to be the domain name, which will come from props custom domain. Then we're going to get the certificate, which is going to come from props dot certificate base path, which will in our case be API. And then we're going to do a mapping between that domain, this domain name here, and our gateway here. Cool. Then what we want to do, just do that. Then let's get the mapping going. We're going to say new API gateway dot base path. Now we're going to get a path mapped to that domain. So how we're going to do that is we're going to say ID API mapping, and then want to pass in the required properties, which is going to be the domain we created at the top, and then the REST API itself with this .apg. Right, now done with that, the next thing we are going to do is then add the base method essentially, right? So how we're going to do that is going to say apg dot root dot add method. Okay, and all we do is just we're going to add a get, okay, on the base path, and you're going to see this clearly in the console when we log into AWS to kind of show you this. Now what we want to do is we want to kind of like make it easy to add resources here to paths. So what we're going to do is, and you'll see is when I use the construct itself in the main.tf file, is we'll pass in what is known as children, and that's what's going to be able to allow us to essentially create these resources on paths, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if, right, props, and I'm going to try and explain this as best as I can, resources dot length is greater than 0, right? So the first thing we want to say is that if the resource is here, passed here, right, this is greater than 0. In other words, if they are added in the first place, right, then we are going to do this whole thing, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to go inside of props dot resources, and essentially we are going to loop through them using the for each, and then we're going to say, and we're going to give each iteration the name of res. And when we iterate, this is what we want to do, right? We want to add the base resource path. And this is going to make sense when we start adding these routes here. We're going to add the base resource path. So I'm going to say const base resource resource, and I'm going to say this dot apg dot root dot add. Sorry, I'm going to add a resource called res.name, right? So essentially what we're doing is, since we already have the root here, right, which will be created for us when we create the API gateway anyways, what we're going to do is we're going to take the root, so which would be something probably slash, right? So it would be like a slash, right? That's the root of the API. So for example, since we're going to use api.cloudspace.co.za, the slash is the root that's created essentially with the API. And all we're doing here is that we're just adding a method to it, right? So now what we're doing is we are now, when we loop through the children, what we're doing is we will add an additional resource to this on this line here. And what that means is we'll say, just get a comment here. So when we add, for example, a resource called, for example, called cart, for example, what that will do is that on the domain, it'll add a resource of type, sorry man, called cart over here, right, on this root base path here. That's all we're doing here, right? Cool. And so how we are treating our API is that for every resource, for base resource, we're going to add an sort of like an auto-generated method of get. So all of these here will have a get method right out of the box. And the reason for that is because we are prioritizing the adding of children to these, right? So you will be in a situation where you want to you'll be able to say, for example, cloudspace.co.za slash cart slash create, for example, or slash cart slash get it by ID, for example, or slash dot remove, for example. So these here, the ID, the remove, the create, all of those are essentially the children to cart, which we're adding here as a base path. So I hope that makes sense. So how we're going to do that is we're going to say res.children dot length. In other words, if there are children added, what we want to do is we want to take the res dot children and we want to for each on them, right? We're going to call each one a child, and then we're going to say const child resource equals base dot resource add, and we want to add resource, right? So the child resource becomes what the base here and us adding a resource to it, and essentially saying child dot name. Cool. Then what we'll then do is then say child dot resource, and when we'll add whatever method they would have passed essentially on the other side, right? So hopefully that makes sense. But all of this is, I essentially do this to kind of make it easy to create both the API gateway on this side, but also be able to add paths, sorry, resources to it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say const API new API gateway, which will import it from, it's importing the wrong thing, this thing. Gateway, and the one we want obviously is our own one here. We'll pass it this, and then what we'll say is cloud space API, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say name, and I'm going to give it a name of dot cloud space dot co dot za. I'm going to say stage name, which is going to be dev. The custom domain name will be api.cloudspace.co.za. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say certificate.acm, which is our certificate over here, right? So all of this will be passed to the API gateway. This would be the certificate name, the domain name, the alternatives, all of that good stuff. At least in light of what it needs, right? So then we're gonna say resources, which will pass in as a list. Remember, right? So it's a list. It's required, and this is where things get interesting, right? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pass it an object, right? Which is going to be the resource. So in this case, I'm going to create a resource called cart, right? And it's definitely going to have children. So in terms of children, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a child path here for getting a cart by ID, for example. Obviously, we haven't planned this API out. We're just, you know, demonstrating how I just do this, right? In the future, I will do a full on a tutorial on building an e-commerce platform using serverless technologies using the CDK. So just stay in tune for that. So for this one, I'm going to say create, and then it's going to have a method as well of post, right? So when you create a cart, you'll use the post method for that, and then name for the third one will be remove, right? If you want to remove a cart, and it's going to have delete. Cool. I think that's enough to demonstrate. So you see, it really, all of the code we wrote here, as much as it was a lot of code and there was, some logic involved, essentially what it allows us to do is it allows us to simplify creating an API gateway that has a custom domain attached to it. So just do this quickly. All right, cool. That's it, right? So what I'm going to do is, and I'm not sure how long this is going to take, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to say CDK, and I'm going to say bootstrap, right? So essentially what I'm doing now is I'm prepping the environment for deploying these resources into it. Let me just check what it's saying here. I do not want errors, man. Let's just check it. Module unknown. Which module is them? Looks fine to me. Cannot find module. Where are you looking for that? Can't find module. Where could you be looking for this? I'm not sure why it's saying this. Just try that. Yeah, things never work the first time, do they? So let me just. Did I have to check this? Oh, that's why. I didn't change it here. Sorry. It would work now. It's gonna work now, but I just didn't change it. I think I forgot to change it here. That's fine. Sorry. My apologies. But anyways, now we're bootstrapping. Unable to resolve. Okay, cool. I think while it's doing that, I'm gonna name this back to main dot ts. Come back and change it here. Cool. The reason it's saying this here is because I haven't exported a profile. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna export a profile here and say cloud space. Cool. There we go. Now let's try again. Hopefully. They usually say third time is a charm. So let's try now. It can take a bit of time. But yeah, while it's doing this, what will be a good idea is let me open the console solo while it's doing this. Okay, cool. Something's slowing down my laptop. I'm not sure what it is. Probably this. I'm not sure. But anyways, I'll open up the console. So let's sign into the console. And essentially, we're home. Are you still bootstrapping? Goodness. Okay, so I think I had bootstrapped already. Okay, cool, that's fine. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna run CDK synth. Essentially, what I'm trying to do here is just to check if I don't have any issues really before I try and deploy this. That's what synth is going to do. So if we get a properly formatted CloudFormation template here, then we know that we are on the right track. But if there's any errors, it's going to tell us. So I usually run this before I deploy into the environment. So let's just give it a bit of time to do that. And while it's doing that, just make sure the console's... Man, stuff is essentially slow today. So I'm just gonna open certificate manager and then I'm gonna open API gateway so long. So that when we, all right, wonderful, looks good, it looks promising. Obviously, you can never be absolutely sure until you actually deploy, but this is a good sign because it's showing all of the resources that will be created, right? Okay, cool. We might have to debug, I don't know, but anyway, let's try and deploy CDK. Deploy. Oh, this exists already. When was this created? When was this created? Can't be that quick. So confused here. Okay, cool. Um, No, I'm like so genuinely amazed as to when this was created because I'm only creating it now, and those are the C names for it. That's so cool. Anyways, certificates created. What's in progress now? Let me just check here. So APIs. Just refresh the page. Oh, okay. There we go. So, um, I'm still amazed as how that certificate was created so quickly. Anyways, it's still creating stuff for the API gateway, but in any case, it's kind of there already. So there's the API gateway. So this is what I was trying to say. So this is now the slash. So it'll be API. So if you look, let me start here. So here's our custom domain whenever it decides to show up. Oh, that's probably still creating. Okay, cool. That's fine. I'm happy with that. It's okay. I'll explain it this way then. So, anyways, so we've got our API here, right? So if we get into our API, these are the resources for our API, this being what we called the base. So this is the base here. If we come to API Gateway, this is the base, right? So it's that slash, and we added a get method to it. So if you look here, we have a get method. And then what we started to do then is to add another, to add essentially, sorry, man, I'm showing you the wrong thing here. So we have the base method created for us. We just added the get here. And then what you're all seeing is that we then look at what we've added here in terms of these resources here, and we start to create these as well. So you start to see a cart here, and then cart obviously has by default a get method to it, but then we start to have these other resources to it. So for example, when we want to fetch a cart by ID, or want to create it, or want to remove it, which in turn have their own methods as well, right? So if you look here, this is now created, um, now completed creating everything, which is perfect. And obviously this right here becomes what is our API. What I'm going to do now is, since this has deployed, um, now if I come to custom domains, there's our custom domain. So I'm just going to click on it, and then what you're going to see is just information about it. And obviously it's got a TLS version here, status, domain name here. But importantly, what you'll see is this is the certificate that was magically created um, over here. Isn't that the ARN? Sorry, man. I'm just list certificates. Oh, okay. I see what's going on here. I probably. Oh, this is just an earlier certificate, man. I can just delete that. It's fine. It's not in use anyways. Sorry, this is what was confusing me. So, in any case, this. Okay, cool. This is the certificate we've just issued now, so I'm happy with that. That was just from a earlier time. Now, this certificate here, if we look here, if I were to search, there we go. We can now get its ARN. Let me just clean that up. Close that. Right, this is the certificate that's used over here. We're happy with that. That's its regional. That's its hosted own ID. This is the important bit, right? This is the important bit in the sense that now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to domains.co.za, which is my where my domain essentially is. Don't ask me why I use them, but I just use them because the domains were cheap. So I'd recommend them to you as well. So anyway, Siba. Um, okay, do that. Cool. Now, I almost told you my password, by the way. I'm gonna change it. So we're gonna do domains, and there's my domain here, Cloud Space. So I'm just gonna manage it. Now, obviously, I've done this before, so I'm just gonna say manage, and what you'll see here is the subdomain here already with one that I had previously worked with. So I'm just gonna replace it with that and say Done. Now, what I'm going to do is, might take a while the first time, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, um, is it supposed to say internal error? Sorry, man. This is what I'm supposed to do. So /dev. Remember, this is a dev environment. Cool. That's what we should be seeing, right? So it means everything's working as it should, but obviously you're not seeing like a proper response, and that's because we haven't integrated anything to this API gateway in the form of, for example, a backend that's written in Lambda, and that's absolutely fine because that's exactly what I plan to do in a future video, because this video is absolutely longer than I thought it should be. But in the next video, what I'll do is I'll build a simple API that integrates with Lambda and takes into consideration the use of a custom domain, ACM, all of the good stuff that we did in this particular video. In fact, I might just make it a simple microservice, serverless microservice using Lambda and DynamoDB, and yeah, we'll take it from there. But in any case, this is how I go about doing this whole process. It's a once-off setup, but once you have done it, then it's kind of like easy to use and work with going forward. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Please don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to like the video, don't forget to share it, but importantly as well, don't forget to hit the notification bell so that whenever I upload these videos, you then have access, you then get notified immediately. But anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.